My name is Justin Wetzel. I am a Principal Enterprise Customer Success Manager here at Jamf. Been around for a little bit, a lot of familiar faces, so thanks for coming. Today, our session here is going to be scaling self-service at the Mac Cisco program. A few years ago, they started an initiative to kind of reinvent and look at improving their customer experience, and it's been a journey that they've been working on. And one of the focuses that they wanted to do was reevaluate how they were using self-service. So today we have Chris Kemp here from Cisco, and we'll be talking about what they're doing over at Cisco.
All right. Thank you. Good morning. Thanks, Justin. Good to see everybody here. Everybody enjoying your JNUC so far? Anybody nursing a big hangover this morning? No, of course not, because we're all business. All right, so my name is Chris Kemp. I'm based out of Decatur, Georgia, which is just outside Atlanta, and I am a systems engineer with the Mac Cisco team. Just a little about my background, because I know that's why you all came here. I was an independent audio engineer before I moved into IT in 1999. I was about a year doing some server support work, and then was a project engineer doing some logic scripting. I was an IT administrator for a radio group where I handled everything that touched a computer, and finally ended up joining CNN as a broadcast IT engineer. Our team was supporting the central video routing and processing and playback systems at CNN Center in Atlanta. And we also owned a small group of edit stations. And they were just then converting these to Macs. And so about 14 years ago, I was tasked with trying to figure out how to manage these Macs with something called Casper Suite. Had never heard of it. I said, okay. We dove in, and I ended up designing and administering that system, the infrastructure. I built monolithic images for all the endpoints, and basically owned that system for several years until I eventually moved full-time to Mac management, first with Accenture and now with Cisco. I've been with Cisco now for about 5 years. You can find me on the Mac Admin Slack. I'm also on LinkedIn. You can see all these things up here. And I'm also a Jamf Hero. Jamf Heroes is Jamf's customer advocacy program where you can meet other Jamf admins, learn about and give feedback on Jamf's product services. And best of all, by participating, you can earn points and get free stuff. They do really nice t-shirts, cups, and kind of stuff exclusive to Jamf Heroes. So that's a nice perk. So they're down in the expo hall. Stop by the Heroes booth down there and meet the customer advocacy team and find out how you can join the program. So today we're going to discuss how the Mac at Cisco program uses self-service to enhance our users' Mac experience. We'll talk first about how we approached some of the visual presentation, and then we'll look at a few of the solutions we've implemented over the past few years within Mac at Cisco self-service. Now, I am a big fan of self-service. It's a great tool. A few of you might remember I did a presentation on a self-service thing several years ago, a compliance dashboard that I built. So I've always liked self-service, and I've found it very useful in every place I've worked. It's great with the flexibility in creating policies. You can create really powerful tools that you can put right in the hands of your users. They can solve their own problems, even if they have limited on-device permissions. So it's really a very great tool, in my opinion. So in the years before the launch of the new Mac at Cisco program, we had invested some time on self-service. We were building out the offerings and spending a lot of time expanding the user's awareness of its capabilities. We would direct them to use it whenever possible for software delivery and removal, and particularly custom fix tools that were usually written to address emerging support issues. And by putting those tools into self-service, we reduced the support calls and allowed our less technically savvy users to be more self-supporting. So when I joined Cisco, we were a two-man team in those days. So we had limited time to consider the self-service app experience from the user's perspective. Our tool descriptions were basic language that explained what the tool was for. For software, the only visual component was usually the app icon. And so with the launch of Mac Cisco, we wanted to build on what we had started, and together with our new teammates, we redesigned our self-service offering to reflect a new look that was being applied to the new internal app store and knowledge articles and various websites across Cisco. So we started with uploading the new header art, a new app icon, and updating our branding text applied to the application. We now call it Mac Cisco self-service. This artwork was chosen from several options that were created for us by one of Cisco's UX designers. His name was Carlos Salas. So thanks, Carlos. Applying the artwork is easy. This is all done in Jamf Pro. If you haven't seen this before, you click the gear wheel on the right side of the Jamf Pro window to open the settings page, and you click to go into self-service section and select the branding section. And you find out places where you plug in each of those images and the text. And there we go, okay. And so this is what our self-service looked like before the redesign. This is the old artwork that we had on there. And this is what it looks like today. Now, of course, you'll notice that there are two different versions of self-service. This is the older version on the left, and it's in dark mode at the moment. But the main point of this contrast is to show you the difference between the artwork and the overall look and feel that we were going for. So next was reviewing and updating the app icons. There are so many great sources for icons. There's, including right on your Mac, if you're not aware, there's lots of icons in the library folders that you can draw on where appropriate, of course. For third-party software, I particularly like SAP's icons.app. It's great for quickly grabbing something from a third-party application. Just drag and drop it, and it spits out the icon files that you will need. I have a link to this at the end of the presentation if you're not familiar with that one, so you can get to their GitHub and check it out. So if you have an art department or a marketing and branding team, they might be another good source of icons. Cisco's marketing team creates a lot of branding elements for employees to use in their various business materials, so we also take advantage of those. We'll see in a minute. Then there's, of course, DIY. If you're like me, I like to get in there and mess around and make images. So you can grab your favorite image editor, roll your own. We usually do that for support tools, which of course don't have their own icon already. And even if you don't do GIMP or Photoshop, you can create these things with Preview. All you need is a screen grab, an ICNS file, and have a Preview spit out a PNG image or a GIF image, PNG probably, I guess, that is 512 by 512 pixels in size. That's not, technically if you have done this, that's not a hard and fast rule, but I do recommend following those guidelines for the best results. So another change I want to talk about we made was adding badges to these app icons. As part of the Cisco App Store integration, we linked to a lot of apps and services that were not previously in our self-service. So these badges are intended to provide some additional context as to what type of tool it is, such as something in the Cisco App Store or something that is specifically a support tool as opposed to just a software installation. And a quick little shout out to one of our new teammates, Jonathan Massey, for creating those badged icons for us. Thank you very much. So next, we looked at how the tools are being presented. Now, self-service supports Markdown language for its tool descriptions. Is there anybody in here who did not know that? A few. So you guys are smart. You're going to see this. That's fine. No, I asked the question just because I'm often a little surprised that some of us don't know that. But you can do that. It gives you some formatting options. Jamf has a white paper that explains all of the details. I'm not going to go into all of the details today, but I do have a link to that white paper also at the end of the presentation. So for ease of use, we decided to create a standard template for our tool descriptions. We considered those descriptions. The main things we wanted to communicate were meaningful text about the tool to tell the user what the tool's purpose is and what it does on their device. Then special notes that required emphasis. Sometimes we need to draw their attention to an important detail about the tool, particularly if it is deleting files or will require a restart of the device. We wanted to include graphics, both for look and user engagement, but there's also potential for conveying some additional information with a good graphic, as you'll see later. And finally, we wanted to provide some links to additional information associated with that tool, like internal knowledge base articles or the company website. So to test out the possibilities, I created a dummy policy called Markdown test, and I inserted each style of Markdown language on a line, just so that we could see what they look like in actual practice, and from this we chose the tags that we wanted to use to build out our descriptions. Okay. Now, there's one thing I'm going to call out here, and I apologize, some of this may not be terribly visual, but I'm going to try and walk you through it. You notice the blue graphic that is after a line of text here. That little line of text is actually a note to myself, and it says, images are centered in the frame dynamically if they are on their own line. Okay? What that means is that if that image tag exists on a line by itself, and you resize the application window, it will move around trying to remain centered in the frame. The line there that says that it says if they're on their own line. However, you'll notice that that is not in the center, it's off to the end of the line. You can pin an image to the end of a line of text and it will not exhibit that dynamic behavior, and it will stay put. So we settled on these choices for our standard Markdown template. We have H3 as a descriptive header. This is for a subtitle or a tagline, basically. As you can see, the name of the tool is already up top. So including it there would be kind of redundant, right? So the tool would be Markdown check. H3 descriptive header would say, hey, this is an awesome tool to show you what this thing looks like. Anyway, so H4 special notes. We also put these in italics just to differentiate them from other bold text. And that's an additional tag, actually, because you'll see where it says italicized. There are asterisks on either side. So you need to include those asterisks to do the italicized. We have descriptive text, of course, which is just plain text, no tags. And that's for your regular language about describing the app, its behavior. H6 we're using for version numbering, if necessary. And then, of course, we have our inline image. We have an AWS share that belongs to our team so that we have full control over the images that we host in self-service. You can link them. It's just a URL link. So you can link directly to them from elsewhere. But as a best practice, you really want to have your own repository. You'll avoid unpleasant surprises that way when the image changes or when someone complains about you sucking up all their bandwidth. And finally, at the bottom, there's the link to additional information to present to the user about this said tool. Now, I'm going back to this picture again. So you'll see, as I mentioned, the picture itself is not in the center. It's justified left. And I don't know if you can see very well, but right under the lower corner, you'll see a small dot. That's a period. That's my line of text to keep that thing pinned and not moving around. And this here is the code for our template. You'll note that the text formatting is generally determined by the number of hashtags in front of each line. I also want to point out that those single hashtags in Markdown, those are H1. In this template, we're not using those. We're only using them as line spacers. Just something to be aware of. That really, the only point is there just to separate things out so you see what each section is, right? So, right, and so the image, again, and I apologize for being so small if you can't see it, but if you notice the image tag line here, just before that, you'll see a period and a white space, followed by the bang and square brackets and our image link. The bang and square brackets is the image tag, okay? Remember that period is only there to pin that image in place so it doesn't slide around We have this template posted in our engineering wiki in plain text, so you can quickly copy and paste it into a new policy and just update the lines as you need. Some of these tags, of course, are optional. Version numbering, if you're not tracking it, delete it. If you don't have some kind of informational text you need to draw attention to, you can delete that. But by leveraging that template, we keep a consistent look across our tool descriptions. And here is an example of the final result. This is our WebEx installation page in Mac Cisco Self-Service. You'll notice how it presents more of an engaging sort of App Store-like experience. We have our descriptive header with the secondary text. We have our descriptive text, version numbering. And if you're wondering, the version numbering there says current production release. That's because in this particular tool, we do not upload a WebEx installer. We merely link out to the current production installer. So we just note that that is whatever is currently being released by Cisco WebEx. So we've got our look together. We're going to now take a look at some of the tools that we've deployed. We use self-service for app management tasks like installing and remove software, of course, providing various self-support tools to diagnose and fix issues without calling the support desk. And we have a few other tools to help them work more effectively with the desk if they do have to call them. We assist our users by providing links to common sites and resources at Cisco. And finally, self-service helps us with some access management tasks, which we'll show in the upcoming descriptions. So let's take a look at a few of the things our team has built. So the first thing most people think of when using self-service, I think, is users installing software. Probably one of the most common things you would look to. And from the user's perspective, it's just a one-button click, install, right? Sometimes it is that simple. But I think as most of us know, there's usually more going on behind the curtain. So I'm going to pick apart how we deliver VMware Fusion at Cisco. Now, VMware Fusion is a licensed application, so there's also an access management piece here as well. Now this is a little story about our world. Due to some technical limitations, we did not have an LDAP server configured in Jamf. We relied instead on a scripted process to set up a static user group. And that was derived from a specific Active Directory group of our license holders. And that static group was then used to scope the application installer. Now the script synced the groups on a schedule. So new users were advised that they had to wait as much as 4 hours from initially getting approval before they could get access to the installer. This was all to allow that script to sync, put them in the group, and make sure that they were in the proper place. So when we rolled out Fusion 13, we really wanted to improve on this. So what we did was we added our new Azure instance as a cloud identity provider in Jamf Pro, which is a newer feature. That allows us to use the directory service user group rather than an LDAP group to limit the policy scope to members of that VMware Fusion directory group. Being able to leverage that directly eliminates that delay between approval of the user's request and the application's availability. So now you can actually download the installer as soon as you get that approval. So that was a great improvement for that part of it. So the user clicks install, what happens? This policy runs a script, and this is a script that we wrote to be reusable. So it takes a couple of parameter values, and it runs an inventory update when it's done, and if necessary, it will restart the computer. And I don't believe that is necessary, but it is in the policy just in case. Pardon me, my place again. Yes, the scripted policy. This is the one that is presented in self-service. So when the self-service window install VMware 13, this is what we're calling. And it is scoped to all computers, but it is limited then in scope to members of that VMware Fusion group in Azure. So that means that users have been approved and they have their VMware Fusion 13 license. They have to log into self-service to access that deployment tool. All right? These are the parameter values that we use. The current version's license key, as I said, we wanted it to be reusable, so we've reused this over a few iterations of Fusion. And the payload policy event trigger, which says install VMware 13. So y'all remember, of course, that these are passed in as parameters 4 and 5 in our script, right? Just a side note about that. All right, and this is the payload policy. And you'll see that that has the just the installer package, and you will see here that it is configured with the install VMware 13 trigger. Okay, this policy is also scoped to all computers, but it is not limited to the Azure group, since this is solely driven from that scripted policy that's presented in self-service. So if someone was to pull this trigger and use it, they would install the software, but they would not be licensed because that is dependent on the scripted policy that is behind an MFA login. Okay? So that was a bit of detail. Let's just run over this one more time from a high level, just so we see where all the pieces fall here. A user requests VMware Fusion from the Cisco App Store. They're then, through automation, added to an Azure group, which puts them in scope for the installation tool. User logs into self-service. They run the app installation tool. The user-facing policy, the scripted policy, creates the application license, and then it calls our payload policy. The payload policy deploys the VMware Fusion software, and it is now ready for use. And I didn't specifically address this, but you may be wondering why we have two separate policies. It's essentially a design choice we made. A lot of the times we have several policies where we have the software in one place and the licensing or some other thing in another place, just so that they can be managed separately. Not necessarily a requirement, but it works for us. So some other things we do, we also provide various tools for users to self-support. Some of these are some scripted fixes, a little more complicated things, but not terribly, maybe. The Mac log collector pops up a Cisco notifier window, which is just our version of the IBM notifier project, if you know about that one. The user enters their ticket number in the window, and the tool gathers logs and puts them into a zip file, names it with the ticket number so that they can hand that off to the support agent. The AnyConnect Health Check is currently in development with our help desk. It verifies the status of some necessary components for connecting to the VPN to help them understand what may be causing a connection issue. Do they have the wrong certificate? Do they have the correct configuration file for the VPN, or the right app version, that sort of thing, you know? Network settings reset is possibly the oldest tool we have, I think. This one deletes a device's network interface and restarts the Mac, causing the system to recreate that missing interface. It actually predates Mac Cisco. It was requested early on by the help desk to help clear up some difficult network issues that weren't responding to normal troubleshooting steps. So it's a blunt force tool for sure, but it has proved to be useful, and it's simplified, you know, them running a lot of manual commands and potentially screwing that up. We also have a few tools that run fairly simple single commands. We can run policies, we can run a recon, and we also deliver a custom configuration profile to users that want to connect to our network with an Ethernet cable. There's some required settings, and so we use this as an on-demand way for them to configure their Ethernet adapter. And I will tell you the reason for doing this, if you're not aware. We used to deploy this across the board, but we discovered that Macs that did not have an Ethernet interface, which is pretty much all of them now, or most of them, unless they've plugged one in. The installation will fail, but then the profile will remain in scope and it will continue to try and install into a loop. So we had to really make this a user-driven thing. So by putting it into self-service, we basically, you have a one-time setup that you have to do. If you're an Ethernet user, you go in, you plug in your dongle, you run the tool, you get the cert, and then you're fine. And it does, after that, it's fine. It doesn't affect anything going forward, whether you're on Ethernet or not, but you have that present. Self-service is also useful as an information hub. You may be familiar with deploying bookmarks in self-service. Those are configured in Jamf on the settings page, self-service bookmarks, enter in your bookmarks. They're really useful and helpful to put those in there. One drawback to that is that the bookmark clicks are not logged in Jamf Pro. And for the redesign, we really wanted a way to track whether these things were being used. We had no idea how many people may or may not have been using any of these bookmarks, right? So to solve that problem, we configured them as policies. Running just a single command to open the URL in whatever the default browser was. Since those policies are logged, we are able to export that data to our data team and track those click-throughs. And this graphic, which I know doesn't look anything like Jamf, this is a Power BI dashboard that was built by our data team. It breaks down the past year's worth of the policy runs, month by month, and graphs the usage of each of these links. So we can see at the very top, and I'm sorry for that being unreadable, but at the very top is the Mac Cisco hub, right? That tells us our users expect to be able to get to our SharePoint page through self-service, right? And we can also see some of these have very little traffic. As it goes down to the lower right-hand, you can see the usage tailing off from the total number of events. And maybe we want to reconsider whether we need to deliver these here, if they're truly useful, or if there's some other way we can deliver that information to them that's more effective. So one thing to note about this approach, the number of policies you have will increase quickly if you start dropping a bunch of bookmark policies. So you really want to manage this approach. You're going to generate logs. You're going to have to sort through a lot more stuff when you're managing your policies. For example, we had to, sort through, look for a few issues in some of our policies, and this just added another 60-odd pages you have to look at. So, I would say use this judiciously, but it's very useful if you really want to know that tracking information. Okay, at Cisco, we have also seen a significant number of users break their MDM enrollments using Migration Assistant after getting a new computer. Has that ever happened to anybody here? Any of your users break stuff with Migration Assistant? Yeah, we know how much fun that is. And this is also a few years old. We didn't want to block our users from it completely. We try not to restrict them more than we have to, right? But this was a problem. So we use self-service to present users with some instructions on how they could more safely use Migration Assistant to move that personal data to the newly managed Mac. All right? So this starts with a restricted software definition that by default will block Migration Assistant when you enroll in our MDM. You'll note that there's a message field at the bottom here that says, if you look at the second line, it says, please open Mac at Cisco self-service.app and search for Migration Assistant to view the instructions and enable Migration Assistant on your Mac. For new enrollments, we also install a dummy configuration profile, no settings, just to flag the computer as scoped in for this block. And it is also used for scoping both the exceptions to the restricted software definition and the Migration Assistant tool itself by a smart computer group. So basically meaning that if you have run the tool already, you will not see it again in self-service, right? We won't show this to you, make you run it over and over. It's just whether or not you have that profile will you see that tool. So let's see, all right. pardon me, my notes. Right, this way, by doing this on all new enrollments also, maybe somebody, they got this, they got a refresh Mac 3 years ago, and they went through this, they said, oh, okay, and they did all the things. 3 years later, they get a new one. Well, their old Mac has already been relieved of this burden, so they won't see that. But when they get to their new Mac, it will pop up again so that they are reminded they need to make these changes before they use Migration Assistant. So when they run this tool, we force them to look at this page. This is done by checking the field that reads, ensure that users view the description on the self-service section of that relevant policy. The description then tells them to uncheck the default selections of moving all of those folders and to migrate only the user folder. You recall I mentioned earlier that the use of images to convey additional information, and this is a prime example of where we show them this is what we want you to see when you're setting a Migration Assistant. One thing checked, and that's it. So, when they run the tool, a script called add Mac to static group runs. That script pulls the serial number of the computer and uses that to do a lookup through the Jamf API, and then to post, it pulls its Jamf ID and uses that ID to pull, to post back and put them into scope for the dummy profile. Actually, I'm saying it moves them out of scope. Pardon me. Just to be clear, let me say that again. When this add Mac to static group runs, it pulls the serial number of the device, uses the serial number to look up the Jamf ID. Then we use the Jamf ID to post back to the classic API, moving them into the static group. The static group moves them out of scope for the dummy profile. We wait a minute for that stuff to sync up, for everything to run. We run a recon, and then a Jamf manage command to apply that current management framework and remove the block. So, quick recap again. It's a lot of information all at once. We're just going to run over this real quick, high level. We use a restricted software definition to block Migration Assistant on all computers with a smart group configured as an exception group. We deploy a dummy profile as a flag on the Mac to set that smart group criteria. We're blocking all machines that have this profile installed. We use self-service's tool descriptions to present instructions to the user, including the graphics, showing them specifically what we want them to do. And we force them to use it using that ensure users view the description checkbox on the policy self-service tab. And then our add to Mac to static group uses that serial number, gets the Jamf ID, uses that to post it back to the exception group, so that profile is then removed. We update the management framework, and the software restriction is removed. All right, so we saw a little earlier about how configuring a cloud identity provider helped us limit access to the VMware Fusion 13 installer, right? We also use self-service to limit access to Cisco resources for manual device enrollments, okay? At Cisco, we required 2 layers of authentication for each device. And on the Mac side, one of those layers is provided by Apple Business Manager. It's a trusted source of devices that belong to Cisco. We know these are our devices. We're okay with them enrolling. However, we don't have that security for the manual enrollment, so we needed to configure an additional layer. Several ways you could approach this. One might be having a web-based workflow where you could sign into a website and verify your identity and then verify your device and do things on the back end. But we wanted to make this a little bit easier for our users to get their device enrolled and trusted. So what we did first was create an extension attribute and require that all manually enrolled Macs have this attribute correctly populated to be in scope for anything related to trusted device status. The user initiates their enrollment, a manual enrollment. They're required to go through an MFA login. When this stage of the enrollment completes, their machine is fully managed, but it is not yet trusted to access Cisco resources. The user then gets a pop-up directing them to log into self-service to complete the enrollment. This button on the pop-up will open the complete enrollment tool directly using its Jamf self-service URL, which can be found, of course, at the bottom of the policies self-service tab, as seen in the graphic above. The user must then pass a second authentication in self-service in order to access that complete enrollment tool. And then that tool, when it runs, it populates our custom attribute using the API, the classic API, and that grants the machine its trusted device status, and then Jamf Pro will install the remaining pieces needed for accessing Cisco resources, such as the VPN or our barcode certificates and things like that. Now, I do have a quick video to show this process. I will tell you that I have sped up almost the entire video to spare you too much pain of watching multiple enrollment MFAs. But I did add the time code just to give you an idea of what it actually takes. You'll see in this case, the full manual enrollment process to reach trusted status took about 18 minutes from start to finish. Most of that time is simply waiting on AP&S to finish the job, though. The actual enrollment itself runs about 4 minutes or so. So you see here, we're logging into through our MFA to get the initial MDM profile. We install that. I'm sure everybody knows here how all this works, right? There's our MDM profile. Profiles start coming down. And you'll see in just a minute over here in the applications folder, Mac and Cisco self-service appears. Of course, the profiles and policies continue to run in the background. We'll wait for just a moment for our pop-up window. There it is, where it says you will complete the enrollment process in Mac at Cisco self-service app. We click log into self-service, pops up our window to our second round of MFA logins. While we speed up the video again. And then there's our tool. We click run on the tool. It is doing some things in the background. It takes a minute or so to finish, so we're gonna speed through that a little bit too. And we're done. And we're waiting for AP&S. Patiently waiting for AP&S. You'll see at the end here, the final set of profiles appear at the top there, and you have now granted trusted access at Cisco. All right, so just to review what we've gone over here, we discussed several aspects of the visual presentation of Mac at Cisco self-service, like branding, icons, and using markup language to create a tool description template for easy and consistent formatting. We talked about how self-service can help with installing and managing software. We touched on a few examples of some of the custom tools that we provide to our users. We talked about bookmarks versus serving links as policies in order to be able to track that click-through activity. We looked at some of the complexities behind our migration assistant enablement, again using self-service tool descriptions to present that visual information to our users. And finally, we looked at how we use self-service to add a layer of access management to our manual enrollments. So if you don't use self-service today, I strongly encourage you to look into what this feature of Jamf Pro can do for your organization and for your users. And if you do use it, but you haven't really given it much attention, I hope maybe you'll take a little time to consider the benefits of making the app experience more engaging. Our self-service makeover is a group effort. So I want to give a nod to the rest of the Mac Cisco engineering team. Great work in pulling all this together. And I also want to thank our leadership team for their vision and the resources to make Mac Cisco a reality for us. Here are a few of the resources I touched on. Please feel free to hit those links if you like. We have the Jamf white paper for Markdown text, the manual for customizing self-service. There's a link to SAP's macOS icon generator, as it's called on GitHub. And of course, a link to Jamf Heroes if you want to get to that site and see what that's all about. All right. So thank you all for your time today. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Or give you a blank stare if I can't do that.
Yes, thanks, Chris. As someone who has a little bit of a OCD, definitely appreciate the continuity that comes into how you guys utilize self-service. Couple of just real quick questions because everyone, I'm sure, would love to get to eat. One question that's out there is, what was the thought process about using the badges to identify, a support icon or the user ability versus using categories?
Well, we actually do use categories. That's one thing I really didn't touch on, actually, was categories. We added several categories specifically because of those tools, so that they would match up with the categories in that app store. It's just a little extra visual something, though. It's just to kind of give people an idea of what they're looking at. I think we threw so much stuff at people. We added a lot of things when we launched. There's a lot of new content in there, so it helps differentiate a little bit.
Cool, and we'll do one more. When having the users read the instructions, how do you ensure that the selection for user profile was the only option selected? How the user profile was the only one selected?
The user profile. I'm not sure I understand the question. Let me see. How do you have user read instructions? Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Yeah, I understand. Well, here's the thing. We can't force them to do it. We can force them to read it. It's kind of a best case scenario tool, to be honest with you. It's like you can't come back to us and say we didn't tell you, because we did. If they don't read it, yeah, sure, some people have clicked through, but we don't have a solution for that yet. Is that coming in 11?
Won't get myself.
Force my users to do the right thing.
Yeah.
Great feature.
Cool. And if people continue to have questions throughout this conference, are they able to come up and?
Yeah, please. If you want to ask me any questions, just come right up and ask me. Like I said, I'm in these other various venues: LinkedIn, Mac Admin Slack, through Heroes, all channels you can get me through. I am on Jamf Nation as well. Honestly, I don't spend as much time there. Jamf Heroes is a bit of a subset, I think, of Jamf Nation in a certain way. I tend to spend a little more time with them and the other place than in Jamf Nation. But I am actually there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for presenting today, Chris. Thank you all for coming, and hope you go and enjoy lunch.
Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your conference.